Hey everyone, Scott Tolar and David Durham here. We're going to be talking about the best practices for the 1 to 4 family contract today and what you can do to make sure that you've got the best possible contract put together depending on the region that you're in, whether it's the Temple Belton area, Fort Hood, Killeen, or even Round Rock and Georgetown. Some things in the contract can be written slightly differently just based on where you're at. So we wanted to share some of those things with you today. David, where would you like to start today?
So where I'd like to start today is that just so that you guys understand that this is your resume to the listing agent. This is your resume to the sellers on the type of work that you do. So that's what this is all about, and just getting the numbers in. The appropriate spots filled out adequately, or not adequately, but filled out expertly. So you have that best chance of winning when you're with the seller.
Great. All right, so should we start with paragraph 1?
Let's do it. So in paragraph 1, the one thing I want to let you guys know is that in this, you need to go ahead and pull up the tax records from the MLS. Realist is the best way to do this because it has the most detailed information that you can get. So that's one thing I would recommend. Also, it's verifying that if you are in, you've got the MLS printed out and the legal description is not correct, the legal description on the tax records is going to be correct in most cases. So just want to make sure that you guys do that. So obviously what you're doing is you're putting in the name of the sellers in here, their full name as you see it in the tax records, and then the buyer's name. And what I would do on this is to have your buyers write out what their full name is on a piece of paper before you write this, so that you've got all the spellings correct, you've got initials in there, so on and so forth.
And ask them how they want the home to be titled once they're the official owners of it. What do you want your statement to say?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the other thing that you'll see from your realist tax records is the legal description, so your lot, your block, and then this is the subdivision. And the one thing that you need to be aware of is that when you're doing the legal description, you need to make sure that you've got phases in there. If it's phase 1, 2, 3, or 4, if it's got sections, it's not just the subdivision name. So you guys need to make sure that you put that into this slot right here. I'm going to mark on here. It'd be right there. This is where the city goes. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And the county for which the property is in. And it states that at the top of the realist tax records for you guys. And then the address, and the one thing I want you guys to notice that it says the address for the property and the zip code. So please make sure that you put the zip code in there.
Yeah. And then if it doesn't all fit there, where's the best place to put it?
Legal description could be attached to a separate piece of paper as an addendum A, which you would then list in paragraph 22 for the addendums.
Or you could actually also put that is one of the few things that you could put in special provisions if it doesn't all fit right here in this area.
Yeah, okay. And then the other one I want to talk to you about is the exclusions here. So you'll see in paragraph 2B and C that this is about the improvements that stay with the property and the accessories. If on the seller's disclosure notice, if you've received it beforehand, then you want to go ahead, if there's any exclusions written on that, and go ahead and write those in. If they're not there, and the seller wants to exclude anything from curtains, curtain rods, anything that's attached to the property, that's where they would put this, is in paragraph 2D. And then let's go into the sales price. And on the sales price, you're going to have the cash portion of what that is going to be. So you need to talk to the buyers on what they're wanting to put down, but more important is you need to talk to your loan officer to be able to get that amount of what they're going to put in on there. The next one on paragraph 3B is the loan amount, which is the difference between your down payment, and then this is the sales price. So all those this one on 3A and 3C, actually I did that wrong. Actually 3A and 3B will add up to 3C.
There you go.
So there's that. On paragraph 4, if you're buying this property for yourself or if you are somehow associated with the purchasing of this property, you need to list it in paragraph 4 that you're a licensed agent, what your percentage of holdings may be, so on and so forth.
And this is an extremely important one to make sure you get done, just because it helps you with any liability in the future to make sure that they know that you owned a portion of either the property or the entity that owns that property. If it's any more than 10% of an entity portion that you own, it has to be disclosed.
That is correct. Okay. So in our next one, we're going to go to paragraph 5, which is talking about the earnest money here. And typically what I see is that on the earnest money, it's about 1% of the sales price.
Yeah.
So if the sales price here is $100,000, then we are generally seeing that this would be $1,000 made out to the title company of the buyer and the seller's choosing. I'm making that emphasis, the buyer and the seller's choosing.
Correct.
So you've got that. The title company, one thing, when you're listing the title company, please don't list the closer in here.
Correct.
Because that is not something that we want to see in these. Both parties, if they're agreeing to that, if anything went wrong, it can cause some liability. We just don't want to go there. Only put the title company's name in there. When it comes to additional earnest money, I don't typically see much on this. The only case I really ever see it is when it is a backup contract.
Yeah, actually, and the other place that I've seen it, David, is let's say that you're out showing a piece of property or something like that, and your buyers only have one checkbook with them,
Yes.
and they're looking from out of town. And let's say that one account that they've got only has $1,500 in it, yet they're going to put $3,000 down in earnest money. This would give them the ability right here on this contract to add additional earnest money once they've either transferred funds or gotten back home and had the opportunity to send an additional earnest money check.
Okay, very good. Let's go into the survey. And so the title commitment. I'm jumping ahead. So on the title commitment, that is either at the buyer or the seller's expense. And by checking one of these two here, you're letting them know. Where you're going to find that it might be at a buyer's expense is if you're in a multiple offer situation, you're really trying to win that offer that you would want to possibly have the buyer, if they're agreeable, to go ahead and pay for that title policy, because to them it's cheaper than having to just keep upping the price and upping the price.
Yeah.
So I want to make you guys aware of that. And also the title company that's listed here that's going to do the title policy generally needs to be the same company that's holding the earnest money. Is that correct, Scott?
Yes,
Okay.
It should be. And traditionally in the state of Texas, the title policy is paid at the seller's expense. And the reason why that is actually so because the seller wanted to provide information to you saying, look, my title is in good standing.
Yeah.
I don't have any major debts or anything that I owe on it. And you're going to have the house free and clear once you've purchased it.
Correct. That is correct. So we're going to proceed on to the next page here. Again, it's continuing on with the title policy, so on and so forth here. And then you're getting down, we need to go back up to paragraph 6A, and that is 8. And what this right here is it's really pertaining to the survey for the property. And if you're getting a survey, whether it's a new survey or whether it's a used one, used one's not the best word, but if it's one given to you by the seller, that can be used at the title company and the mortgage company, as long as there's not any big discrepancies that they say, we need to have a new one.
Yeah.
But in this paragraph, generally what I'm seeing in almost every resale contract now is that the the buyer is asking the seller to pay if there's any shortages in the survey that arise in the future, then it is protected by the title policy if there's any shortage in areas. So what you would want to do here is you want to check that it will be amended and it's the buyer or seller's expense. Again, if you're in a multiple offer situation, you might want to say that it's going to be at the buyer's expense. Guys, this is 5% of the total policy premium, the cost of that.
So it's usually between $50 and $100.
Yeah, it is. So that's another one of those things that you can really get if the buyer's willing to do it.
And did you know why this was actually even added to the contract?
Well, tell me, Scott.
Well, it was added to the contract because at one point in time, title companies were just throwing in this additional coverage and not giving the consumer the ability to choose whether or not they actually wanted to have it.
Oh.
And they were just automatically charging them for it when it was one of those things that's an optional expense. So that's why it was added, is so that the consumer knows whether or not they want to add this to their policy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, in this business, you learn something every day. So anyway, let's go down to paragraph 6C, which is about the survey. Again, if you're in a multiple offer situation, you can choose any one of these. The most common one that's chosen is number 1. And what that says is that the seller will get to you the used survey.
Reloved, rehomed.
Reloved, whatever. Survey and the T47, which is an affidavit. And by the term affidavit, that means that the seller has to sign that form and it has to be given to you as the buyer's agent and your buyer with a notary stamp on it that it's been signed in front of a notary. If you don't receive the affidavit,
that's where that bold writing
what that bold printing is, then it means that the seller gets to pay for a new survey for the buyer.
Correct.
When you're working for the buyer, I would say that you always want to have a new survey if possible. A lot of buyers don't want to have a new survey. They don't want to incur the expense, but no survey is absolutely perfect. There are situations, and that really goes back up to this paragraph, is if there's any shortages in the survey, shortages in the land, the lot, whatever it may be, it's covered. So the other thing that I see here, if you are doing number 1, is I typically see that the survey in the T47 should be in your hands by the 3rd day from the effective date of this contract.
Yeah.
And let me just go back a little bit here. What I want to say is we hear a lot of agents that say we're presenting a contract to you. Guys, this is an offer. This is not a contract until all parties have agreed.
Correct.
So I just want you guys to be aware of that. Also, if the new survey is needed by the title company or the lender, then it can be either at the seller's expense or it can be at the buyer's expense. Either one. Again, multiple offers, you guys need to decide on that.
Traditionally, what we'll see here in this, most of the time that I've seen, is actually it'll be the buyer's one that is checked there. It basically says, look, if the existing survey is not going to work for them, for either the lender or for the title company or for both, if it doesn't work for one of them, it's going to have to be, you're going to have to get a new one. And traditionally, we'll see the buyer's box chosen there because it says, look, you've provided in good faith what you think is going to be an okay survey. I'm not going to fault you for that.
Yeah.
And especially in multiple offer situations and things like that, you'd want to put the buyer's checkbox there.
Yeah, you would. If you're in a multiple offer situation and there is not a survey that's given to you by the buyer's agent, by the listing agent, then you would want to go in, and again, if it's multiple offers, you might want to check number 2, which is at the buyer's expense. And a survey can run, on a residential, we're not talking about farm and ranch, but on residential, we're probably looking at about $500.
Yep.
So that might be something that the buyer in negotiating, if they're in that multiple offer situation, that they go ahead and pay that. So the other one is for the sellers. paying for that. That is really when I see that used is when we know up front that there is no survey from the listing agent, from their sellers, that we go ahead if we want the seller to pay for it and we check number 3.
Yeah.
Don't see that quite as much.
And you can only have one of these 3
That is
checked.
correct. That is correct. Good point. Going into objections, the objections pertain all to paragraph 6 of this offer. And it's objections to the survey and it's objections to the title commitment. And if there are any objections, then you have so many days to put in the number of days that you will get in writing to the seller or listing agent what needs to be taken care of. And typically what I see is that the title company, if anything shows up, the title company's letting us know what that is, and it's usually something that they can take care of on their end. In 25 years, I've never run into anything like this. It could happen.
And what are some things that you should be looking for when you get the title commitment?
Well, the most important part of the title commitment for looking at is really Schedule C.
Okay.
And Schedule C has, you are looking for things to make sure that the names are correct for the buyer on the property. You are looking to make sure that the legal description is correct on it. But Schedule C is, to me, the most important. For example, I had one the other day that came in on one of my listings, and it said that there was a judgment against Joe Smith. And so I called Joe and I said, hey, I see that there's a judgment on here. Is this you? It was not him.
Yeah. They just
But
they
have to put it on there. The other thing would be is if you're buying the house for residential use and you find out maybe that it's commercial through zoning, there's that as well. Do you want to add to that?
You actually mentioned something really important about names on there. So I'm going to go not necessarily right here where we're talking about, but for names, if you're going to be on the listing side of things and you know that you're going to a listing appointment and you're only meeting with one person and you pull up the tax records like you should before you go to your listing appointment and see 4 names on there, it's going to be important to ask who are these other 3 people that are associated with this contract and save yourself some headache later when this is all figured out by the title company and they see a bunch of other names on there that haven't necessarily consented to selling. So it's important to ask that question.
Yeah, because you can be in an estate situation where it is an estate. Mom or dad maybe has passed away, but there's 8 siblings. Well, all 8 siblings have to agree to this through their executor or executrix.
Or you have brothers and sisters out there that dad didn't tell you about.
Yes. That would never happen in my family. So anyway, a lot of people will write in here whether it's residential. Recently I had one they wrote in residential, but the property that they were buying, now this was on an unapproved contract, so let me just throw that in there. They had written residential, but actually it was a multifamily lot, so I crossed through residential and frankly just left it blank.
Yep.
So you will have that as well. You will also have on here, on E2, if the property is in a mandatory homeowners association or not. And you'll need to do your research on that to make sure it is. The MLS does state whether it is, but not all the time are the agents correct on that. And so what you can do, and I have done this before, is go back in the MLS and look through on the subdivision for those sold properties and kind of see if there's a generalization. That's not the right word, but there's a trend that it is a homeowners association. Or call the agent that's got the property listed and ask them, is this in a homeowners association?
And sometimes you can tell just by driving into the neighborhood.
Yeah. When you're in real estate long enough, you will know what has HOAs or not.
Exactly.
Homeowners associations. So there's an addendum, we'll go over that later, that goes with this. But this is saying whether it's in a homeowners association or if it is not. And you need to check one of those boxes. Okay? And then going on down here, I don't believe we have anything to mark on here, so we're going to go ahead and get rid of that one.
Now, just because we're not going over every single paragraph doesn't mean you shouldn't read it.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. Please read these. The other thing here is this is pertaining to the property condition. So the first one is asking if the buyer, the buyer's agent, or the buyer have received the seller's disclosure notice. It may have been left at the house. It may be in the MLS under documents. You do need to look to see if it's there. If it's not, then you want to call the agent and get that from them. But at the time you write the offer, if you don't have it, then what you would do is you would say, I have not received the seller's disclosure notice. I'm sorry. It's that one. And then you need to put the number of days that's in there. So this would be about 3 days that I would say that you would want to have the seller's disclosure notice in your hand so that you can forward it to your buyer so that they can review it. And they have 7 days to review it after receiving that.
Correct. And there are only 11 instances in the Texas Property Code in which a seller's disclosure is not required. And at the end of this video, I will put a list of all of those instances in which they are not required.
That's great. The next one here on acceptance of the property, generally seen that the property is being accepted as is. And I will go over in paragraph 23 a little bit. This gets trumped by paragraph 23. If there's anything that your buyer specifically wants right now at the time of making an offer to be done on the property, then you would check number 2 and you would list what you want done there. Please see that it says it is not subject, or that it's subject to an inspection. That does not go in here. That would be covered under paragraph 23 for the unrestricted right to terminate the contract for any reason.
Correct.
The next one down here is pertaining to the service warranty contract. That's what I'm used to calling it. They call it a residential service contract here. And this amount that I typically see in here is anywhere from $350 to $600. And a resale, as we're talking about here, is going to be in 99.9% of the offers, unless you're in multiple offers and you want to have the buyer pay for that just to help sweeten that offer.
And this $350 amount right here is pretty much the least expensive, no frills home service contract that you can get.
I would say $450 to $500 is the average of what I see.
Yeah. And that's going to be one of those things that's kind of across the board. It doesn't matter which region you're in because those contracts sell for the exact same price no matter where you're at in the state.
The next one, the thing that you guys love so much, is the closing date, and so do the buyers and the sellers. The one thing I would say on your closing date is to not make this exactly on the end of a business day at the end of a month, because that's when a lot of people are doing their closings. Maybe move it back in a week from the end of the month so that you're not up against the clock.
Or even push it a week to the next,
Or a week
month.
to the next.
Yeah.
Usually when the reason I said before is if somebody has a lease, the first time home buyer, they get out of their lease.
Yeah.
If it's at the end of the month, they need to be in a week, ahead of time.
And the other reason this is so important is because a contract has to have a beginning date and it has to have an end date. And if you don't fill this out, you do not have a valid contract because there is no ending to it.
That's correct. And one little thing that kind of what he is saying is that you do not put TBD, to be determined.
Yes.
I have seen that just a few times for whatever reason, and it has got to have a date. Anything that's got a number is required to have a number. It's not to be determined. It's not zero. It has to have an amount of money in anything pertaining to this.
And this is just the on or before date. So if they say, hey, we're going to close on the 7th of December and the 15th of November comes and everyone's clear to close and everyone has agreed upon, hey, we can go ahead and do this, you can still close early as long as all the parties agree to it. This just means this is the latest it's going to happen.
That is correct. Paragraph 10 is talking about possession. The most common that I see is that the buyer will take possession upon closing and funding.
And this is what we like to see as well.
This is what we love to see, yes. And closing and funding are two different things. Closing is where you're sitting at the table with your buyer at the title company. Buyer is signing all their documents. Funding is when buyer and seller have signed everything and the release of all funds pertaining to the transaction of that home are completely dispersed. You know, you've dispersed. You've been given a, what am I trying to say? You've been given, the title company is calling you up and saying that it's funded. The checks may not have been cut just yet, but all the parties involved are good with everything on the signatures and all the documentation and stuff.
This is really exciting for you because usually when the title company calls you and says, hey, it has funded, they're usually calling and saying, we'll have your checks ready soon.
Where would you like it delivered?
Get paid. Or would you like that wired? Things like that. Yeah, so
yes.
You'll know for sure when it has funded. They make a pretty big deal about it.
Paragraph 12A1B is very important.
Actually, can we go back up here real quick, David?
Yeah.
The other option there is according to a residential lease from a promulgated TREC form.
Yes.
Now, that's a risky move for many reasons. Because if you allow somebody to move into the home, even though they have a residential lease, temporary residential lease that has been prepared, if something goes wrong and financing is just not going to end up being attainable, now you have a tenant in your house who's not very happy.
Yes.
And while most people are going to do the right thing and move, there's a minority of people out there who have other thoughts about, well, now I'm not going to get the house, so I don't want anyone to have it. So it's just a really, really tricky place to be in. So if you can avoid it, do it at all costs. If you can't avoid it, come and talk to me about it because we want to make sure that we're setting you up for the best possible scenario to play out there.
Yeah, good, very good point.
Special provisions. If it's got a promulgated form by the Texas Real Estate Commission there, you need to use the form that has been provided by the Real Estate Commission. Be very, very careful with this paragraph right here because there are a lot of things that you would think that you would want to put in there that would be the unauthorized practice of law in the state of Texas, which could ultimately cause you to lose your real estate license, which you've worked so hard to gain. So don't do that. And if you see something in there that, let's say that you're the listing agent, the buyers have put something in there, and you're not quite sure what it means, your sellers aren't quite sure what it means, before you have two choices there. Cross the whole thing out and say, hey, we're not going to even look at that paragraph, or choice number 2, go and speak with a real estate attorney. And when I say real estate attorney, don't go to Joe Schmo, the guy who does divorces. Go to somebody who you know and trust and has experience in real estate law. And if you need some referrals for that, David knows plenty, I know plenty. Just give us a call. We'll be happy to refer you to somebody who has a lot of experience in real estate law. It's important because there are some people out there who try to put in some funny business in this particular portion of the paragraph. And if you don't know what you're doing, you don't know how to read it, always go to an attorney. Even if you do know how to read it, go have your clients go to an attorney just to make sure, because unfortunately it's one of those things where if a paragraph's in just the wrong spot, or it's in the wrong spot intentionally, it changes the whole meaning of it.
It does.
So be careful with that one right there.
Very good. So in paragraph 12A1B, what basically this is saying is that the buyer is asking the seller to pay some portion of their closing costs.
Yeah.
On FHA, it can be up to about 6% of the price, as we stated, of the sales price on the property. So it can be up to 6%. Where I'd say that number would be helpful to get from would be from the loan officer that the buyers are using. And then you can plug that number in there. What I want you guys to understand is it says up to whatever this amount. So let's say that it says $2,000 here. That does not necessarily mean that the buyer is getting towards closing costs the entire $2,000. Right. It's up to. So I just want you guys to be aware of that.
If it's $1,500, it's just going to be $1,500. Although you had allotment for $2,000, they only needed $1,500 of it. So you're not going to get that as a credit toward the price of the house or a check back to you at closing. It just, that money stays with the seller.
That's exactly right. The next page here, I don't believe there is anything on it here that we're filling out. On this page, there is just a few things that you'll want to do, and I want to make this very clear. When you're filling in the buyer's contact information here, please do not put your information in here, because it does say where will all of this stuff, the title commitment, anything that needs to be sent from the title company, from us, the agents, where does it need to go? Well, it doesn't need to come to us, so we do not want our address in here. We don't want Scott's address. We don't want Keller Williams. We want the buyer's address in here, their phone number, and their email, so that they receive the correspondences and not us. Correct. For liability reasons.
Yeah. Because if you were to put your information in there and those things came to you, you would then be the responsible party. And if you didn't get that to the correct people, your clients, that they could fall pretty hard on your shoulders.
That would not be nice.
And if you don't have the contact, if you're representing the buyer and you don't have the contact information for the seller, the seller's agent and the seller are responsible for filling their portion of it in. You still can have an executed contract without this portion right here being filled out. You need to make sure and be very clear that your client, who you're representing's information, is completely filled out here.
That is correct. We're going to go over addendums in a future recording, but I do want to state that if there is third-party financing, whether it's FHA, VA, that this box is going to be checked. And again, we'll go over that addendum at some future date.
This one right here.
And then also that the property is subject to mandatory homeowners association, and that would be in there if it's in a homeowners association. There's a number of other addendums here. We're not going to go into those at this particular time.
Another one that you'd probably see, you'd check other, and it'd be the non-realty items.
Yes.
You're going to see that one fairly common as well.
That is very common. Paragraph 23 here.
The really important one. This one's super important. Do not miss this one.
Yes. Different agents are going to put different amounts in here. What I like to put in here is $250. It's not uncommon to see $100, like Scott mentioned. If it's in Bell County, it may be $50, it may be $100.
Yeah.
Here in Williamson County and in Travis County, $250 is kind of what I'm starting to see as to be the norm.
Yeah.
The other thing here is, so for the buyer to have the unrestricted right to terminate the contract for any reason, you've got to give them a certain, or the seller's given them a certain amount of days. And I have seen this to be 5 days to 14 days. Now, don't put that amount in there. 5 days if it's in a multiple offer situation to get that inspection done ASAP. 7 days, kind of same thing, but you're running up on a weekend to get it done. 7's getting to be the normal number that I see. But it can go up to 14 days. It can be 10 days. It just depends. Multiple offer situation, you're going to want to get this down to the lowest amount of days that you possibly can.
Yeah.
And what I want you guys to understand is it's until 5 o'clock that if there is any amendment for negotiation of repairs, if the buyer just decides, this paragraph is not just for inspection, that's mainly what I see it's used for. Mm-hmm. And that's why in previous I said that the property is as is. Well, it actually gets trumped by paragraph 23.
This is the buyer's remorse contract as well.
This is, and what I say is that the buyer can decide they don't like the carpet color, they don't like the brick color. They can pull out for any reason.
Or they don't like the neighbor.
or they don't, exactly. And so the termination notice has to be in by whatever one number you have in here, whether it's 5 days, 7 days, 10 days, 14 days.
Yeah.
A termination notice would have to be given to them, or an amendment for negotiations, and those negotiations finalized by that number of days at, you're going to say 4:59 p.m.
Yeah.
that night. With all
Finalized signatures all done.
Everything.
No more negotiations.
Everything.
And you mentioned Bell County a minute ago. I've seen things when I sold homes up in the Fort Hood-Killeen area also. I had one where it was we agreed upon $50 for a 20-day option. So it can be widely different depending on where you're at. The other thing that you may want to think about if you are in a multiple offer situation is high option money, lower earnest money, with the understanding, and make sure that your clients are very, very clear and they understand option money never comes back.
That is correct.
Once it is written and that check is cashed, it is gone for good.
Yeah.
Sayonara. See you later. And that can be an appealing way to make sure that the sellers know that you're committed and you really, really want to buy this house. The other thing that can be done that is a much more risky option is completely waiving your right to a termination option, which would mean that you do not fill this portion out.
Right.
Whether you've done that accidentally or intentionally, if this is not filled out, you do not have an option. In which case, if they've chosen that on purpose, we want you to get something from them in writing that says, hey, I understand that I've chosen not to have an option period, and that means that that they still have the ability to get an inspection if they choose to, yet they wouldn't be able to negotiate repairs or anything that were on that inspection. And then a complete side note, if during the option period they choose, hey, I don't want to get an inspection at all, make sure you get something from them in writing as well that says, hey, I've decided that I don't want to get an inspection.
Always encourage them to have an inspection and encourage them to do paragraph 23 so they have that unrestricted right to terminate for whatever that reason is. Just push on it if you have to, but if they're just insistent, like Scott said.
Yeah, and for me, when I go back through your contract several times before you hit the send button to make sure, because that one right there, I've seen it unfortunately 3 or 4 times in the time that I've been a team leader where that was missed.
Ooh.
Thankfully, of those 3 or 4 times, it was not on our side of the transaction. Yet, it's important to make sure that one right there is especially filled out correctly if you do want an option. Or let's say maybe they're shopping around for houses and they've been in multiple offer situations and they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. And they put in offers on 4 different homes, and for some reason
Does that happen?
It has happened, believe it or not.
Oh my gosh! Who ever knew?
Yeah, and let's say they got all 4 of them, and they didn't choose an option for all of them. Well, then they're at risk of losing their earnest money. For every single one.
They're pretty committed.
Yeah,
at that point.
Yeah.
On the last page here, guys, what I want to say is again, this is your resume to the listing agent and to the sellers. Make sure you go ahead and fill your information in completely here and check whether most likely you're going to be buyer's agent. Make sure you put your license numbers in. Scott, your license number is
632386.
386. So that needs to be in here, and then this one
our broker number is 9004001.
So you want to make sure you have those in. Make sure you have all of this filled out. The title company really does need this information.
Yes.
They do use it. The one thing I'd say is just take that extra step and go ahead and fill in as much as you can on the other agent, the listing agent's information. I mean, you're not going to probably know their number and who their supervisor.
You can always look it up on Trek.
You can always look it up on Trek. But it's just, again, it's one of those psychological things that when an agent sees it, they go, wow, this agent's got it together. He's really working for his clients.
And he's helping me out.
And he's, really.
Yeah.
And so it's just, all of these things really help in helping you to win that offer.
Yeah, I want to add one thing to this here. So if you're doing an offer and you're working with another Keller Williams agent that's either in Round Rock or Georgetown, all of your information for both of you guys is going to go right here on this right side of the offer, because this is for intermediary status. So if it's a Round Rock agent working with a Georgetown agent, it's still going to go here. Now, in the eyes of the Texas Real Estate Commission, we are 2 separate brokerages. We do have the same broker, but we are 2 separate brokerage entities. Yet, we want to go one step further and just make sure that the clients understand that we do have the same broker, so we'd rather you have that information both here on this side of the paper. Now, if it's with a agent from another company and they're the listing agent, it's just going to be this top portion for the listing information there that's filled on their side. And if you're the buyer's agent, it's going to be right here on this left side for you. So just make sure that you're filling that part out correctly. So if it's an intermediary transaction out of both the Georgetown office or the Round Rock office and the Georgetown office, or hey, even just the Round Rock office, then it would only be this one side here that is filled out, and this side would be completely blank.
It would look like this. No, you don't put an X.
Yeah,
but
don't do that.
don't do that. And
then
then just
this
make
one-
sure, I
yeah.
mean, you want to get paid.
You do want to
Don't
get
you?
paid, and this means absolutely nothing for securing your payment because
That's exactly
the
right.
1 to 4 family contract, there is a, I think it's a paragraph 8 of the contract, I can't remember right this second, but it says that this contract is not to be used for negotiating compensation. That's what the listing agreement was designed to do on the listing side of things, and that's what the buyer representation agreement was designed to do on the buyer side of things. Yes, the listing agreement side of things does say often 6%, and that's usually split up 3% to the buyer side, 3% to the seller side. And at the same time, the real way that is truly negotiated and told to you that it's going to be paid is through the MLS, because the MLS was
Because that's the
originally set
agreement.
up for compensation agreements between brokerages. It was not as pretty as it is now. It didn't even have pictures for the most part a long time ago, and it was a book that came out that just said,
it was
if
a
you
book.
bring a buyer, here's what I'm going to pay. And it's evolved into something that is very functional and really pretty, yet the most important part to us is at the very bottom of every single MLS sheet, which is that part that says administrative use only, and then on the right side it says the commission agreements. And the other thing that's important is when you're going to be going out and showing properties, print those out before you leave the house, because it's got the information on that date and nobody can change what's on that piece of paper, especially on the commission agreement part. And unfortunately, there are agents who are not as ethical as you and I, and have been known to go and change those things after a contract's been done. So if you don't have that sheet of paper, it's really difficult to prove what amount of commission you were supposed to be receiving. So, got a little off topic. It was important though, so I wanted you to know.
There you go. There you go. So that just gives you guys
Well, then who's filling this out?
Who's filling that out? Well,
Yeah.
actually, so in the listing agent is going to sign once they've received the option fee in hand.
Mm-hmm.
This is not in the mail. This is not to the title company. This is when it is in the listing agent or the seller's hand.
Correct.
That they would sign this. This is done by the title company. Once the earnest money, you deliver the earnest money, the title company will fill all this information in. And let's go back one page. Once everything has been agreed to in writing with signatures and initials, all of that, please make sure you put the effective date.
Correct.
Now, this is, let's say that it's at 11:59 on November the 2nd. Don't put it to November the 3rd. It is November the 2nd that this went under contract, and make sure that you have that date in there. It is the biggest thing that title companies have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is this is blank.
And he used the example of November 3rd. And if once the contract has been executed and November 3rd goes in there, your option period starts. The day number 1 is November 4th.
That's correct.
And then you count from there. November 3rd does not count as one of the option days because you don't have an entire day.
What I am going to say is that if it is in the seller's ball court, the listing agent's ball court, and they call you and tell you that it's under contract, but you don't have a copy of it, it's under contract.
Yeah.
So you guys need to know that as well.
Yep.
So, and when they gave you that phone call or that email, that's the date that the effective date is.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
That is it.
Perfect.
Go get them, guys.
All right, we thank you for joining us. And as always, if you need anything, I'm Scott. He's
I'm
Dave.
David.
Give us a call.
All righty.
Have a good day.